Hi, welcome to the New York Parrot Literary Corner. I am Dustin Pickering, your noble and honest host. Today we have the award-winning poet, Michael Graves, who lives in the redwood-covered mountains just outside the San Francisco Bay Area. His unusual approach to poetic subjects spans the spectrum from the cerebral to the deeply erotic and has won the hearts of thousands of readers. His second book, Messages in a Bottle, Communications to My Future Self, contains 67 of his pieces and took one of the top awards given by the Colorado Independent Publishers Association in 2018. The book addresses this question: what if you knew that after death you would live again? What messages would you send to yourself? The result of this endeavor is a gripping, life-changing collection of poetry that spans the gamut of love, death, politics, social upheaval, art, hope, humor, brass tacks, metaphysics, and more. Thank you for joining us today, Michael. Nice to meet you. How are you?
My pleasure, Dustin. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me on your show.
Quite welcome. It's going to be exciting and interesting, and we'll have a great time, and we'll learn quite a bit, I'm sure, from each other. So what prompted you to write Messages in a Bottle, and what was it like editing the work and selecting a content?
Messages in a Bottle came from a concept that I had. You know, let's just say for a minute that you were certain that this wasn't the only life you're going to live.
Mm-hmm.
And this seems to be something it's a concept that's been around for thousands of years, and it kind of waxes and wanes in popularity. But let's just say, what if I were going to be around again? What would I want to tell myself from that time? What would I want to tell myself that I've learned this lifetime, let's say, in a future life, so I could kind of get a jump start on it, maybe. You know what I mean? So that's where the concept of Messages in a Bottle, Communications to My Future Self came from.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to piece together poems that had something to do with life, with the environment out there,
Mm-hmm.
with experience and things. A lot of times in poetry, we tend to write about what's going on in here. Poets will tend to write about the angst and what's gripping them and what's happening right now based on the immediate experiences in their life and how they impact them.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to try and get something that was a little more outside of that, something that was looking from the outside on, hey, tell me about love, tell me about politics, tell me about hope,
Mm-hmm.
tell me about making an effort toward achieving something. Tell me about something that's going to uplift me. Give me a couple of warnings about things to watch out for.
Mm-hmm.
And those 67 of them came together in Messages in a Bottle.
Interesting. That's quite a concept, and I think I totally agree with you that we tend to be, as poets, more introverted, involved in the immediate.
Yeah.
You know, I always like to call it snapshots of the moment. So that's an interesting approach you've taken, is going ahead of time and looking back, and saying, you know, to yourself what, you know, what's going on, and trying to approach it from the perspective of you know, the future, and talking back to yourself, and you know, that's quite an interesting. So, you know, was there a specific catalyst for that line of thought, or was there like a I don't know, were you just sitting down thinking, wonder what I would say to myself if I was, you know, in the future and talking to myself now? Was it like a thought experiment, or was it something that you had been dwelling on?
Good question. I firmly believe that we live more than one life.
Uh-huh.
And I've got a lot of hard-won lessons this time.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess to some degree, I didn't want to have to go through that whole thing again. I was hoping I could kind of benefit from what I've learned this time. Okay, now this is completely unreal to some people. They figure, okay, you live once, you're dead, end of story. That's it. that's not my viewpoint. It's not
Hmm.
my personal viewpoint. So I guess what inspired it was a little bit selfish. I wanted to jumpstart myself, but it was also,
Hmm.
what do I have that I can share with others? What do I have that I can share with other people who are out there? Share with my children, share with my grandchildren, share with my great grandchildren. What can I help put back into the culture, so to speak, that would enhance the lives of others, that might give them a different viewpoint that they didn't have before, something that would give them kind of an aha moment, kind of a, I didn't really think of it that way before, and maybe introduce them to a different direction of looking at certain things. I I know that in the past I've had 3 or 4 people contact me and tell me that they were ready to just cash in their chips and basically kill themselves. And then
Hmm.
they read one or another pieces of my poetry and they changed their mind. I
Hmm.
can't tell you how honored and humbled I feel to have that experience, to be able to help somebody to that degree that it really makes an impact on their life.
Hmm.
Anyway, that was a really good question you asked. I guess that was the kind of the catalyst for the book. Nobody's ever asked me that question before, so
Hmm.
little thought. Yeah,
Interesting. So you had to think a little bit about what maybe led to the development of the book from that question. That's an interesting story that, kind of looking back and trying to tell people in the future what you were thinking in the present, and you do this by kind of kind of imposing yourself on the future in a way. Quite
yeah.
interesting. Why do you think you chose poetry to communicate those values and those ideas?
Well, there's a story behind that.
Hmm.
Back when I was in high school, I had a math teacher, a geometry teacher, great guy. And frankly, geometry was one of the few forms of math that I could really wrap my wits around, you know. But the guy just kind of droned on in the same voice all the time, talking about geometry. And I would have to sit in class. And frankly, I was passing out. And so I I started writing poetry kind of in self-defense to stay awake because I liked the teacher, I liked the guy, but I was just, it was hope I was just going unconscious. And when I was in high school, I wrote a bunch of poetry, possibly the worst poetry anybody would ever want to read.
Hmm.
It was bad. I mean, there's maybe 1 or 2 pieces that I even consider looking at from that time period. But then after I graduated high school, I went to the University of Northern Colorado in Greeley, and I had a poetry instructor. His name was James Doyle,
Hmm.
and I owe a lot to Jim because I guess he's the one who taught me that if you can't say something in a way that hasn't been said before or that you haven't seen before, what's the point? What's the point in repeating something everybody else has said over and over and over and over and over? Because I mean,
Hmm.
you get people like Shakespeare, Rimbaud, Rumi, these guys, they've been writing, poetry's been around for a long time. You
Hmm.
know, there are certain common topics that run throughout poetry, love being one of them, and other things. But what good is some something that you create if it's just a repetition of what everybody's written before? You know, um,
Right.
Van Gogh, Monet, guys like that. I'm not comparing myself at all to those guys, but they took a different path. So Jim
Hmm.
got me to see that you got to write something more than just something somebody can see anywhere else. And I owe him a lot in that regard. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't fun. You're
Hmm.
writing, pulling your heart out on a piece of paper, and you write 6 or 8 verses, and the guy goes, well, okay, this line is good, this line is good. Get rid of everything else and start over.
Hmm.
And it took me gritting my teeth, and believe me, I was not happy with him for
Right.
a while. I've been writing poetry for years, and you're telling me this and that. And I was going, yeah, dude, transition into something else.
Right.
So I did. I buckled down, and like I said, he taught me to start growing up as a poet. And it
Hmm.
was from Jim Doyle that I really got the first kind of glimmer of a concept of what real quality is in poetry. And it's not just put down a bunch of things that rhyme and whoops.
Hmm.
So then I continued writing. I played music for quite a while. I wrote some lyrics and stuff like that. But then I really dug more deeply into poetry around 2009, 2010, something like that, and started actually just writing. It's kind of a funny story behind that. I was on Facebook, and a Facebook friend of mine, another poet named Carol Eddington, wanted me to join this poetry group. This was before I really had been writing much, and she
Hmm.
wrote me this question. She said, because I wrote, what was it, some kind of comment on Facebook that was somewhat lyrical, and she said, "Are you a poet?" And I remember standing in front of this computer that I'm on right now, thinking, I could be a poet.
Hmm.
So I wrote back, yes. And from that point on, I just sort of started developing it, and here we are.
Interesting. It's kind of a long process of many inspirational people who brought you to the point where you're at today. So, why do you think you captivate thousands of readers?
Well, let me read you this thing that I wrote myself in 2019. Okay,
Okay.
paragraph there. And it's on writing poetry. It says, when you write for yourself, you can write whatever you want. It doesn't have to make sense to anyone but you. But when you write for others, that writing must contain truths that resonate with the public to which you're writing. They may not realize yet that these are truths, but these truths have to be there. They're what connects you to your readers. If you don't have that, you don't have shit.
Mhm.
So I believe that poetry, this is my opinion, poetry, in order to really resonate with others, in order to communicate beyond a person's circle of friends or relatives or something like that, or something you just read to yourself on an afternoon, has to contain some element of truth. Not just facts, but you can go beyond facts and
Mhm.
extrapolate on facts to find further truths out beyond that. Um, and to answer your question, I think it's because I try and build truth into every single piece that I write.
Mhm.
See, art and philosophy have a lot in common.
Mhm.
The philosopher, truly, isn't sitting there in an attic going, oh, what about, what about, what about? The real philosopher, there's theoretical philosophy, there's applied philosophy. Applied philosophy is the guy who goes out beyond what's been invented, out beyond what's been conceived, out beyond what's been written or painted or sculpted or whatever, and gets that new stuff out there because he's conjecturing beyond the boundaries of what's known. And then he brings it back and shares it with others.
Mhm.
Too many people think of a philosopher as some guy who's, entitled by the wealth of his parents, sitting under some pear tree, munching on a pear in the afternoon, going, "Oh, why is the grass green? Why is there air? Why is there fill in the blank? Whatever."
Mhm.
But an applied philosopher, and I'm going to link this back to art because it really ties in. An applied philosopher goes out there, they find out what's going on, they conjecture, they take truths, they build on the truths, and then they take a jump out. And then they bring it back and share it with others.
Mhm.
Anyone who invents anything has been there. Anyone who creates poetry, the likes of which people haven't really seen before, art, again, Monet, guys like that, Van Gogh, guys that take a different turn on something. They go someplace that hasn't been shared with the public before, and they come back and they take the French Romantic school and they punch it in the nose and they say, no, 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 no. We're going to paint what we see, because they had a philosophical shifting viewpoint. Okay, so art is very much like that. Almost by definition, an artist, in order to create, must partake, if you will, of applied philosophy, not just sitting conjecturing on, oh my, what words are magical, what numbers are magical, why is 7 the perfect number, and all, introverted things. They have to get out. They have to experience life. They have to look at what's there and think, okay, that works, but what if? And how can this be applied to what we're doing, what we're thinking, what we're experiencing? How does this apply to love, to others, to hope, to politics, to social change, to the way things should be? And I think that's at the very crux of the creation of art. That function. I hope I've answered your question.
I think so. Yeah. Pursuit of truth and invention, and through thought and through experience, and that's something you express in your poetry. So why don't you share a couple of poems with us, and let's see what we can look at.
Okay. Let's see. I don't know how much time we have.
I'm not quite sure either, but go ahead and read what you would like to read.
Okay. I mean, asking me to choose one of my pieces is kind of asking me which one's my favorite kid,
Right.
Let's take something on hope.
Okay.
Something on hope. This is called The View from the Lighthouse.
Right.
I have seen the storms far off and approaching. I have watched the crashing waves yet to come run their course. I have heard the howling wind in the dark, wet night. I have watched the tides. I see the rocks that lie in wait beneath the shining surface of the calm sea. I see the slow, unstoppable swell of the tsunamis seeking to subsume the shoreline. The sea itself is made of changes, always changes. Some sudden and violent, some transient and fleeting, some deadly and permanent. With perspective, you learn the difference. Vicissitudes can kill you. Even the word sounds like choppy water. Life can turn on a dime. Let it. Allow it to turn and then ride it in your direction. Anything else and you founder and become at last becalmed. With perspective, you learn the difference. Just because the water is choppy does not mean disaster is certain. Adrift is not death. It is simply adrift. Know the stable point of land. Know the star that does not fail. Know very well the decision that means more to you than life. And on that, plot your course and never waver. Do not panic when the wind hits a fresh gale, when the waters turn angry and the masts begin to creak and strain. That is simply the way of the sea. Sailing is at its most exhilarating when the sails are full and pulses pound, provided you stay the course and ride out the storm. Don't change direction based on a single stretch of heavy weather. If what you seek was near at hand, you would not be sailing. And
interesting. There's something about the way you use language in the poem that's very direct, but you're tackling some very complicated questions in so many respects, and it sounds like almost like at the very beginning, I've seen the storm, I've seen the wave, etc. That's almost feels like you're looking from the future back, like you've seen this all and you're reporting back to yourself. So I can see that. And then you have the title, Messages in a Bottle, and you're talking about the sea. Is there sort of like a thematic thing you're doing, or is there, is that maybe just coincidental to that poem, or was there like a direct, an actual intention of that sort of theme of the sea and the, maybe like the messages in a bottle sort of, play out in that?
If I get your question, it's not knowing what I'm going to run into in the future. I had to kind of pick a diverse bunch of
Mhm.
to put in there. I'm not sure I really got your question.
What I was asking was this, your theme there in that poem kind of goes along with the title of the book, Messages in a Bottle. Is there and throughout the book, is that sort of the central theme revolves around the idea of the messages in a bottle, the sea and the White House and so forth, or is there a central motif flowing through the book, or is it very much a different, criteria for each poem, or its own thing? Are they all their own like separate poems, or was there an idea, sort of almost a plot going through the book?
Well, I guess the theme is basically, hey, dude, pay attention to this.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Pay attention. I mean, for example, oh, what's another one? Um, let's see here. Well, let me read you this one. This is
Okay.
along this line. It's from my first book, Reflections on a Crystal Wind, and it's about poetry.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we'll get back to the other one. It's a lot of my stuff is in free verse, but this one's not. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and this one's called Homeland. You might get a kick out of it. I live in a land that lies between Ars Poetica and daylight. Near Poesia, the sea of dreams shining softly in the moonlight. Cross the isthmus of illusion down the river of riotous time, you'll find me here beneath a tree, happily batting out rhymes. Beyond the plains of perilous plight and the hills of recombinant verse, it's a land where poetry lingers like clouds in a sky you just love to traverse, and a huge balloon made of phrases and verbs tied together with lines of conjunction, buoyed by what verses so light and so clear, so delightful their near restrict function. On the other hand, there's another land to the east where the verse is so sodden that poets, who are normally creatures of light, are quite proud of being downtrodden. In pedantia, poetry is a serious thing made of scary rules and compunction. With so many levels of interpretation, you can barely retain mental function. With references so arcane and obscure, it's easy to question validity, except when you note that the poet who wrote them would die drowning in excess perfidy. Clarity in poetry is a dangerous thing that terrifies scholars and hopes, who failing to see to the bottom of things, bind their words up in mirrors and smoke. The effortless flow of simplicity just evades their awareness, I guess, and all the intent at the end of it all is to wow and confuse and impress. But the poetry of truth can be simple and clear without so much as a riddle. Its premise is such that it needs no device, no artifice, no tremulous fiddling. A poetic statement, clear and concise, understood by any who read it, is vastly superior to one made with lines so confusing they act to defeat it. A piece thickly bound in pedantics based on overworked pontification makes a far better sermon than poetic verse as its roots rooted in obfuscation. My homeland, though, is in a place where poetry is thankfully brimming with lightness and grace laid out at a pace that doesn't set your head spinning. I come from a land that lies between Ars Poetica and daylight, near Poesia, the sea of dreams shining softly in the moonlight. Cross the isthmus of illusion, down the river of riotous time, you'll find me here at the end of my days, happily batting out rhymes.
Mm.
So I decided to write one that had some meter and rhyme.
Right. I like that you kind of like have this contrasting aesthetic of the Ars Poetica and then the the light, so it's sort of like you have a sense of there's both clarity and also maybe a little obscurity, but not quite obscurity, like a poetic kind of obscurity where it reveals more than it conceals. And so you have those kinds of that sort of like a dialectic going on there in the poem where you discuss those kinds of oppositional traits of thinking and how they reflect into the poems themselves. What an interesting poem. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Thank you. There's one I'd like to read a little bit later. It's called On Poetry and Social Responsibility. It's kind of a signature piece of mine that I put at the end of each one of them.
Okay.
It's
Yeah,
kind of
we'll
long.
get that at the end. I think we can get that one at the end of the program, towards the end. When we ask about advice and so forth, you can read that one if you want to read that at the end. So, what sort of reviews have you had of the book and your work that you have find interesting as most? And we have remaining 9 minutes or so left. So, it just popped up with that.
I'm sorry. Please.
We have a remaining 9 minutes or left or so, and I was saying, what sort of reviews of the book have you had that you think are worth talking about? I mean, there are a lot of people that like to talk about books. Did anybody say anything that really struck you as remarkable, that really insightful about your work in general?
Oh, let's see. I should have prepared for that, but I didn't. I've got here's one by Dr. Carol Brooks Platt.
Mhm.
She's the author of, I'm just reading it off the back of the book here. Author of In Their Right Mind. It's the lives and shared practices of poetic geniuses. She says Michael Graves is the real deal. He takes us into the poetic and philosophic life, good literature, and full relationship with gusto. He engages us thoroughly, often jauntily, with the full cooperation of his highly knowledgeable, metaphoric, rhythmic, and often comic poetic mind. Very highly recommended. She was very kind in her review on that one.
And that is a very nice remark to make of a poem or poetry of somebody's poetry. And I think it's a great journey to read a good book of verse that has philosophical merits, as well as it covers a lot of ground, and it covers it in a way that people can relate to in some capacity, where it's not just obscurantist kind of something really that you can't really get. It's like you have to puzzle it out in a way. It's sort of
Yeah.
like something that when the way I see you write, when you write clear and concise, I think you use that phrase, and I like that about the poems, that they're very direct, sensuous imagery, that has philosophical depth. It's very nice to read that, to hear that. So what was your poem that you were wanted to close with?
Oh, okay. Let me just make another point here first, and that is
Okay.
that, anybody who writes a book of poetry has to keep in mind that not all poetry is for everybody.
Right.
There's pieces that some people are just going to go nuts over, and some pieces that they're going to go, oh, please, you had to write
Hmm.
that, So, I mean, sometimes I've posted a piece online, and I've literally, when I was posting it, said to myself, gosh, I hope they don't hate it.
Hmm.
Sometimes those are the ones that people respond to the most. And
Right.
yeah, yeah. And
It
other
happens to
times,
me too.
yeah, yeah. I'm sure a lot of poets have had this experience. Other times I posted a piece and I'm going, yeah, this is going to knock them in the aisles. And the response is like, nah. So
You
I've
never
kind of,
know.
yeah, I've kind of given up trying to figure out who's going to like what or whatever, and just, you know, have at it
Right.
when I do it. Yeah. So this one, the one I just asked about,
Hmm.
it's kind of a long piece. Part of it's prose and part of it's poetry, but this is something that is kind of dramatic. This one will be my message to poets everywhere.
Excellent.
It has to do with my viewpoint on poetry and poetry's proper use in society. And I've made a point of adding this one at the end of each one of my books.
Okay.
And it's called On Poetry and Social Responsibility. Hope you don't mind if I get a little dramatic on this one.
Go for it.
Okay. Poetry is one of the most dangerous, most powerful, and one of the most unorganized forces in the world. Consider the effect that a single poet can create on the human psyche. Shakespeare, Rumi, Rimbaud, Dylan, Poe, Pound, Dickinson, Baudelaire, Cummings, Neruda, Yeats, Plath, Ginsberg, Burns, Bukowski, Dylan Thomas, Blake, Frost, Wadsworth, Whitman, and countless others. Poetry, combined with music, was powerful enough to play an important part in helping to change the social face of my country in the 1960s. If you were there to witness it, you know exactly what I mean. One of the most famous pieces of poetry of that decade begins, "How many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man?" Poetry soothes the aching heart. It kindles the flame of love. It is a precursor to inspiration. It calls men to sail a sea that they otherwise might not. Poetry performs a catalytic function between conditions, a bridge between disassociation and engagement, between non-involvement and responsibility, excuse me, between denial and consideration. At some point, a piece of poetry left a mark on you that was indelible. You can still recall it. That quality in poetry can bring change to the world, literally. If poetry is not also used to bring about needed change in social and political conditions, it denies a fundamental aspect of its basic purpose. And to this degree, and in this way, it lies fallow. Poetry is not bound by physical barriers. It is not stopped by walls. It can infiltrate elitist compounds and pierce the walls of fortresses and prisons. It can bypass embargoes as easily as a breeze travels down a city street. I'm writing from a redwood forest in California. You're reading this. Distance is not a barrier to poetry. One of the reasons that poets are held in contempt by those who use force to suppress is that while poets command the very, very real skills to inflame the spirit of those who are oppressed and move them to active social change or even open violent revolt, that ability is far too often used by poets for nothing beyond introverted maunderings voiced in cautious, hushed, whiny tones. As a result, suppressors find spitting on poets a very safe thing to do. Poetry is powered by the human spirit. It's carried in the hearts and minds of the people. Historically, ideas have toppled empires. All social movements, all of the changes in history have been sparked by communication. I am the song on the lips of slaves. I am sire to the million whispers in the night before the riotous dawn. I am the throbbing lifeblood, the hope that breathes yet beneath the heel of the iron boot and awaits its time. And I am that time which will come. I am the driver of men beyond broad, deadly expanses, thirsting for new worlds. I am the line plotted beyond the edge of charts. I am the dreams beyond those yet dreamed. I am the new voice of songs yet to be formed on the lips of those yet to be born. And I am the dawn of a new age. Poetry once lacked a proper distribution system. We now have a distribution system which is more powerful than any in the history of Earth, the internet. Change can now potentially take place one reader at a time on a very, very broad scale. Poetry does not need to sway 6 billion people in order to achieve its goal. It only needs to reach and affect those with significant influence or reach a significant number of people for the change to occur. What if we had 1,000,000 poets creating life-changing pieces in a wave which is directed at a single point of oppression or directed at a focused few points of suppression? Think about it. What kind of effect might we then create? It is time to send the tyrants screaming into the night, pursued by a wave of voices that no number of bullets can ever kill.
Apologize, but we have less than a minute, so I'm gonna have to stop you. I apologize so much for that. This is our anthology, guys. If you guys want to buy a copy of this and get in touch with me at literarycorner@newyorkparrot.com. Thank you, Michael, for joining us. I apologize for stopping you. This is wonderful. Subscribe to our channel, 1 million subscribers, and please get in touch with me at literarycorner@newyorkparrot.com. And this has been the New York Parrot Literary Corner. I'm Dustin Pickering. We had Michael Graves today, and we don't know where we'll be tomorrow. And thank you again, Michael, for joining us on the program. And have an excellent afternoon, everybody. And take care. Keep writing.